questions. So tell me what you guys are planning tomorrow, and what do you want people to hear from your movement?
Well, we're trying to follow up on the rally we had last Monday in Raleigh at the state capitol. We had somewhere between 800 and 1,000 people show up to show their support and say thank you to Governor McCrory and the legislature for overturning the Charlotte bathroom ordinance. This time we're expecting the number of attendees to be in the thousands. We know that there are churches from all over the state bringing people in by the busloads to stand up, to show that the majority in North Carolina really does agree with the legislature for overturning the Charlotte bathroom ordinance.
Now, we heard almost immediately from a lot of people who were against HB2, but it seemed to take a little longer to hear from people who are in support of it. Do you have any reasoning for that?
Well, the entire issue was triggered by a local ordinance. So it was very popular and a topic of conversation in Charlotte, but not across the rest of the state as a general rule. And as word got out and spread and people saw what the impact of that ordinance was going to have, then they became more interested, started paying attention, and then got more involved.
Now, what do you guys think of some of the other things in the bill besides the bathroom portion? What do you think about workers' rights and also about localities' right to set their own minimum wage rate?
Sure. The cities and towns in North Carolina exist by virtue of a charter granted to them by the legislature. That charter empowers them to organize and to operate as a city and a town or a county, and without that they cannot do so. So they derive their authority from the legislature. The legislature does this so that they ensure the equal application of North Carolina laws evenly in all 100 counties and their political subdivisions. The issue of the employment is a very contentious issue, I understand, but I'm actually a bit confused because people were saying that the Charlotte ordinance was more business friendly, and yet it imposed upon businesses the direct cost of complying with this ordinance, of adopting, not only adopting policies, but modifying in some cases their restroom facilities at their own expense to accommodate a very small portion of the population. When you look at the employment discrimination side of it, it's very business friendly to my view. And people say, but they took it out. You can't sue in state court any longer. Well, if you look at it from a business perspective, how could I encourage a business to settle in North Carolina when I say, yes, please come here, and any employee with a grudge can then hold the threat of a lawsuit over your head for up to 3 years and drag you through a very expensive and cumbersome political judicial process. What they've done now with HB2 is to ensure that these complaints and these contentious points are settled first through an administrative hearing. I would think that all parties to any such a dispute would want it resolved at the lowest possible level. And yet for some people, the only thing they seek is the high dollar judicial awards that can come only from the courts. But under HB2, they can still have that administrative hearing. And if they resolve it, everybody wins. And if not, they still have 6 months to file their complaint with the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission and proceed to the federal courts. So nobody really has been denied the right to sue, but they have had the pathway changed through which they can pursue their grievance.
Now, you actually said that, the bathroom portion of the bill, it's in response to a very small percentage of the population,
right,
transgender or people who wish to use a different bathroom than was on their birth certificate. It is a very small percentage of the population. Knowing that, do you think that it was really necessary for the state government to get involved in it?
Without a doubt. Actually, if you set the SOGI issues aside for a moment, what the Charlotte ordinance did was to say that we as a city council have the authority to dictate to the Mecklenburg County School Board what their locker room, shower, and restroom policies would be in their schools. but not all county schools reside in the city. It would have an effect to force the board to have two different sets of policies, one for the schools located within the city limits and another for the schools outside of the county. That disparity that their ordinance created would have been an even greater injustice had it been allowed to stand.
Now, tomorrow, there's going to be a big Moral Monday movement. There are going to be a lot of people there who are against HB2,
Yes.
and I know you guys are going to have a lot of people there. So far the protests have been pretty peaceful, no tinglings
Sure.
or anything like that. How do you keep it peaceful?
Well, we have no intention of being aggressive or antagonistic with anyone. We simply exercise our First Amendment rights to voice our opinion in the public square. And it is incumbent upon everybody to show us the same courtesy we show them. We're not the ones getting up in people's faces and trying to shout them down. At the rally last Monday, we had protesters as well. They were just across Salisbury Street, and you could occasionally hear them when they shouted. But to our 800 to 1,000 people, they had about 40. And I know because I filmed it and I froze the frame and I sat there and I counted the heads. And we expect them to be there, but the Moral Monday crowd has always been roughly the same group of people. And the numbers have always been small in comparison. And they are just as entitled to have their voice heard. And I hope they have their voice heard, because when government officials finally make the decision, at least they can claim that they have listened to both sides.
Okay. All right, anything else you would like to say? Anything major that I'm
No.
missing that you want to touch on?
I think it is important when you look at who is behind these rallies on our side. You have a number of different organizations. You have Return America, who has organized this particular rally, the North Carolina Christian Action League that hosted the one last week. You have the North Carolina Family Policy Council, the North Carolina Values Coalition, the Keep NC Safe Project. There are a number of conservative groups who are coming together and coordinating their efforts so that the end result of everything we do will have the greatest possible impact on the legislature to convince them that what they did with HB2 was correct. The night before Charlotte took their vote to approve this ordinance, WRAL in Raleigh did a poll, and 66% of the respondents supported overturning the ordinance, them not passing it. And when I compare that to the 61% who voted in favor of our marriage amendment in North Carolina, that tells me that North Carolina is predominantly socially conservative, regardless of the issue. And when you have just a few rogue, unelected judges that decide that the voice and the vote of the people does not count, that's when our government goes astray.
You're referring to, I guess, higher court judges deciding to overturn.
Exactly. And I'm not convinced that the court really has jurisdiction, to be honest with you. There are many scholars and pundits, students of the Constitution, that would say that unless a authority is specifically given to them in the Constitution, the 10th Amendment reserves that right to the states to decide for themselves. And yes, we have businesses, we've had entertainers say that they're going to pull their business out of North Carolina. But I think to that 61 to 60% of the people, they're really not upset. And they're not upset because all they've told us is that whatever morals and principles they have are for sale to the highest bidder. And profit is their final determinant. I founded this North Carolina Chamber of Conservative Leadership recently to become a nonpartisan bridge between all of these various groups of conservatives.
Right.
And to provide some leadership training to the people that are running these groups, because quite frankly, the passions are running so high that if they don't know how to run a meeting, if they don't know how to have a constructive dialogue, they can become just as much a part of the problem as anything else.
Yeah, at this point you've got so many voices in
Yes.
the mix that it's
That's right.
kind of hard to tell everybody apart.
And every one of them, I am sure, believes just as firmly as I do in what I believe in.
I know.
And you can't lose respect for that.
Yeah. It really is incredible to just think about our governmental system and how people are so passionate on such a different topic.
Sure.
You know? They're on such different sides of the aisle, but still so passionate in what they believe in.
Well, if you look at the Federalist and Anti-Federalist camps that were argued with each other during the founding of this nation, they were every much as opposed as we are today on any given issue.
Right.
And yet they found a way to resolve it.
Yeah. That's the thing. There's not very much resolving going on anywhere in politics these days.
Well,
it's people just sticking to their guns.
There are very few people in politics that make what I call the godly argument. And I at times criticize some of my own Christian associates for making the Christian argument and putting that label on it.
Yeah.
Because the values we're founded on are Judeo-Christian. They don't. They're common to both. There's no Christian church, there's no Jewish temple or synagogue dictating to government what our policy must be. But the great thing about our Constitution is it made sure that we, the people, were the ones that told government which values needed to be reflected. And that's where that vote of we the people comes in.
Yeah.
We've just gotten away from it.
Yeah, the government is so big these days. It seems like the people themselves who do the electing, they're just kind of drowned out.
Well, I don't know if you know the background, but Charlotte proposed this ordinance over a year ago, and it was voted down.
Okay.
And the conversation started then between Raleigh and Charlotte, between Governor McCrory, because he was a former mayor of Charlotte. And Governor McCrory was talking to people in Charlotte. He's wanting to do this.
Yeah.
And the members of the legislature said, don't do this. We're going to overturn it if you do. So when Reverend Barber gets on TV and says, well, they crammed this bill through in 12 hours, they made it sound like the thing hadn't been written yet, but it had been drafted over a year ago. It was sitting on the table. It went to a committee in the last session, and all that can be verified, but it never went anywhere because Charlotte voted the ordinance down. 2 people ran for city council on the pledge of getting it passed, and only 8% of the voters turned out for that municipal election. So they won easily. The only people who turned out were their supporters. And that's why we have what we have. That's not a majority, it's not a mandate. And people think that lower level races don't matter. And yet they do. And this is proof of it. I ran the numbers at the March 15th primary, and of the people who voted for president in the primary, only 90-some% voted for the Senate race. And it got down to 80% when you got to the council state races, down to almost 70%. In some of the council state races, some of them got more. People just didn't even bother to vote. They voted for president, but they didn't vote for these lower tier races. And that's why we wind up with some of the politicians we do.
Yeah, that's a good reminder of how important it is to vote for your local representative.
Exactly. That's when it turns out best.